let's continue.
Where were we?
That's a good question. I thought you were keeping track.
No.
Well, anyway,
something about the liberal arts thing, but I thought
who was okay?
Maybe we kicked that up.
We kind of did.
You're asking who ran that, and there probably was a director of some kind, but I don't remember exactly how that worked. I know for a while, each year, there was a freshman LES coordinator and a sophomore, junior, senior, and so on. But ultimately, I think that the dean just required that there be a certain contribution of each interdisciplinary, each concentration or department to the LES program. But I don't know.
I was wondering who the main champions of that were. I mean, Bob Mayer was a person it says that he had a lot to do with the curriculum. There were a couple other names
Bob Mayer had responsibilities as vice chancellor, I think, as for the budget. That was, I think, largely his domain. I don't think he did a whole lot with the academic program. Ed Widener knew what was going on and fostered certain relationships and certain involvements with it, but it would have come down to the academic dean ultimately. I think about that time it was John Beaton, and he probably had an associate dean who had some stronger responsibilities, for overseeing the LES program and so on. There were some strong faculty proponents of it, don't get me wrong, and they did their best to keep it going. And
who were they? Could you name?
Chuck Motter, I remember, was one person who had some strong involvement with the freshman program. The junior LES, I recall, Bill Kipper had some, I think early on had some responsibilities there for the foreign component of it. I don't remember the other two. The sophomore experience might have just simply been a concentration responsibility, and they were budgeted for it and they were expected to do certain things.
A couple of names I saw in some old articles, and I did not know these people. I think one was Swinnerton?
Swinnerton, yeah, Al Swinnerton.
And Frontera?
And Dick Frontera. Those were early on years, very early.
Who were they?
Frontera was a political scientist, and I think he came in even in the very early days of the development of the program. George Ahern was another one, and they were here and then they were gone, So, and then I didn't have a whole lot to do with them, but it was very early. It was in the late '60s, early '70s, probably. I think when we got into the '70s, then the budget started to be an issue in terms of a very predominant administrative structure, and so we had 4 deans, the 4 colleges, and that ultimately was replaced by a single super dean, as it was called, and so those sorts of positions early on were important administratively because we were just getting started and setting up different programs and whatnot, but it didn't take too long before that multiple dean structure, and then each of them had an assistant dean, and so it was just overkill in terms of.
Was it a matter of cost? It was a budget issue?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I don't think it could be justified, and things like timetable and so on, all those were done by the administrative, the assistant deans, and budget, and I don't know, it just seemed like there was a lot of redundancy in it. So didn't persist.
What can you tell me about Beaton, Sargent, some of these names, Story, they all kind of left when that organizational structure changed.
Yeah.
I can't find much on them. Did you know them?
Well, sure. Fred Sargent was, I would call him a human ecologist, maybe, would be best. I think he came out of Texas, and he was hired early on in the history to head up the environmental science component of the university. There was another name in there, can't place it, who was going to take care of the human biology side. And these were concentration chairs. They were essentially department chairs. I'm sorry, no, that's not right. They were deans. They were at the dean level.
Beaton,
yes.
Sargent,
Beaton,
Story.
Sargent, Story. There's one I can't remember. And then they had, in the case of the environmental sciences, Fred Sargent, who was the dean, had an assistant dean, who was Tom McIntosh, and then John Reed was brought in to be chair of the so-called ecosystems analysis program, interdisciplinary program, and Jack Day was brought in to head up the environmental control, other concentration in the environmental sciences college, and that persisted for a while, that arrangement, but the deans did not persist. The deans and assistant deans did not persist very long.
You tell me anything about their describing these people, what their interests were, what they were strong on? Were they all very sociable people? Were they quiet? Were they?
John Reed, I'll start with John Reed, was our mentor. And we couldn't have asked for, when I say we, I'm talking about the new young faculty who were still in the tenure track and hadn't made tenure yet, and were trying to do some research and trying to do some new teaching of new courses and a number of other kinds of service things related to the governance of the campus and so on and so forth. And he brought a strong sense of academic values, and we encountered it, and everybody, that had any wits about him could recognize that this was important kinds of values, because it gave us a more elevated sense of our position as professors, as assistant professors even, and the importance of appropriate conduct and values relative to that role.
Could you clarify, by values, what comes to mind?
Well, the values of honesty, integrity, the values of personal conduct, the values of arriving at an opinion in a discussion or an argument in an executive committee or whatever the case might be, related to achievement of a professor, and the responsibility that you bring when you have an advanced graduate degree, a PhD, what that means in terms of how you do research, what kind of integrity is appropriate and inappropriate, and so on, things like that. And because his arguments quite often about whatever the issue was always seemed to arise from that set of values that he had, and we learned a lot. And other leaders, deans and assistant deans, offered nothing in that respect, and so he was an important figure for us. Jack Day was equally important, and for other reasons. He was constantly urging more innovation and constantly urging new directions for the program, community involvement, going after grants to deal with, different ideas and so on and so forth, and different arrangements of people with common interests. Those he, as an engineer, he moved at ease into economics and into political science and into other kinds of social interactions as being very important in terms of having relationships with other people. So they recognize where you come from and your honesty, and you do the same for them, and so on. So things like that.
Did Widener bring Reed in, or was
I think it was Sargent. I think Sargent was the dean, and early on he brought in John Reed and Jack Day to head up these departments. Now you might say, well, why did you have to bring somebody in from outside? Well, the number of faculty with any experience was pretty small. There was a large group of young assistant professors, and I made associate professor in, let's see, when was it, 1972 or something like that, and I found myself being chair of the university committee and heading up the faculty meetings and the full faculty agenda and everything else, and I was way over my head, and so John was very helpful in that respect, and so yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the case for the other deans at that time. They were staffing, and some of those staffing results were better than others, and I don't know just why. It just turned out that way. We had a really good crop of young people that came into the environmental sciences. Now, I think back on it, it was really a good bunch of people, and they were committed. We invested a lot of time in course development and curriculum and so on, and you begin to sense some ownership of the thing after that much time.
You mentioned that there were advisory committees that came up with the original
Oh yeah, we were talking about that.
academic plan.
Yeah.
Who were those people? How many were there?
I don't know. I know that one was Bob Rogotsky, who was a professor in meteorology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And that I didn't know at the time, but pretty soon, because he was heading up the Sea Grant program, I had very good rapport with him, and with the Sea Grant program, we funded our research for 20 years, and so he was on it, but I don't know who the others were, but they were that level people who had some experience, academic people, business oriented. They had a diverse array of backgrounds, I would guess. Anyway, they set kind of like an outline for what this campus should look like and what its goals were going to be in terms of the academic plan. And then there was surely some similar kind of committee that advised on the physical plant, number of dormitories, how many buildings do we need? How are we going to lay out the campus? And things like that. I'm sure there was similar kind of things going on at that time with Ed.
How about Harrington's staff, his assistants?
He had staff that I remember now who made projections for the size of the campus based on something which we didn't understand at the time. So they projected that this was going to be a 20,000 student campus by the year 1985 or something like that. And therefore there were dormitories for married students, there were dormitories for students, undergraduate students, graduate students, because the expectation was there would be a graduate program, master's level program at least, about that same time. And it never obviously happened. And the development of the campus, of the physical plant, did follow this four-cornered kind of thing in which each college had a wing of the campus with the central library and so on. Well, things weren't exactly four, so we combined environmental sciences and human biology as one of those four wings, and then the other humanities and social sciences had their own area.
It seems like the dormitories was a big issue of controversy, because that's one of the things that the legislature pulled the budget on, wasn't it?
We never achieved that size of student body, and subsequently, this was now about at that point in time where many campuses had overbuilt their dormitories. In other words, they had many more beds than their size could accommodate, and in population of the student body. So we got to that point where we had no dormitories, and Ed Widener knew full well that we had to have a resident component to our student body, and lobbied hard and long to get dormitories, and it didn't work. And he and I don't want to get too specific about this, but I know that he finessed the privately funded apartment buildings. And I don't know if you were here at that time when they first were building those things. Yeah. And then once you have some built, you can use them as collateral to build another bunch, and that worked quite well, although it essentially went as a process. The building of those apartment buildings took place without consulting the governor, who ran the, what do you call it, the facilities.
State Building Commission?
Yeah, the State Building Commission, yeah. And so Ed had to kind of do some shuffling, some dancing there to accommodate the governor. Finally, they had a breakthrough with some private funding, I think, to build one of the dormitory types that we have now, of which now there are many, because now they had some additional leverage they could use as capital to build the next one and the next one, and so on and so forth. So this has certainly realized the dream that Ed Widener had for being more of a residential campus than what we had at that time.
Do you think that
And the other component of it that he fostered from as soon as possible was to go Division I in athletics, and because he came out of an experience at Michigan State where they had made that decision early on in their life to go to Division I, and it changes your image completely, and it gives you increased publicity, from your different teams, basketball in particular. And the decision was made we weren't going to do football, and it was going to be basketball as the primary sport, and soccer, and so on. And other things came along, and but anyway, yeah. So that made a big difference in terms of the residents, student population, and of course the visibility as a Division I university.
We were talking in the prior segment about lessons learned. There was experimentation. Some things went right, some things didn't, but we learned. Let's talk a little bit more about there. What are the things were different? That if you were a teacher or a student in Madison or La Crosse or Minnesota, whatever, you came here, what did you get different?
Well, you were suddenly thrust into teaching interdisciplinary courses, for one thing. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
you mean?
that was, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's the real impact? These are terms.
And you just, first of all, you interview positions for these openings, for these open in your academic program, and you have to let people know that this is what it's all about, and we have these interdisciplinary courses, and you'll be expected to develop a specialty course in your area that fits this interdisciplinary description, and some people are interested in it, and other people don't understand it. And
So what happened in your case?
well,
What did you have to learn?
I don't know. It was different because we didn't have very much trouble in the early stages of bringing people in to participate in the development of a new university. That's a real unusual event in history. And so the ones that came, had pretty good motivations and were ready to fit into this kind of a program. And I can't give you specifics here, but in the process of developing this, we got into some pretty wild ideas about what kind of courses would be appropriate and what courses would be really interesting interdisciplinary things or interesting liberal arts things to do. And then you start getting feedback from outside the campus, okay? Or you have interviews with people coming in and they're looking at the titles of some of these courses and they go, wait a minute, this is really wild,
Oh, you give me a specific?
No, I can't. I wish I could dredge one up right now, but there were some things like that. And so, if that's the traditional line and this is the wild line over here, we'd be going out this way, and somebody say, wait a minute, we got to tuck this in a little bit and start not getting too far away from the traditional, because we've got colleagues that I got to deal with if I'm giving a paper reviewed, and they see this name, Paul Sager, Professor Ecosystems Analysis. And, what is that? I mean, we were using the word ecosystem here before people in Madison were even willing to consider using that term, and because I remember using it on a manuscript that I submitted, and I was told, you can't use that term. You can't measure. We don't know the size of an ecosystem. It has no concept, no boundaries, and so on. So.
Were you using that in a title or in an actual narrative sense?
Both. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
the Green Bay, we would, but I would routinely refer to the Green Bay ecosystem, and then you get outside of the campus and you refer to the Green Bay ecosystem, and some of these people say, you guys are a little far out there, and so you get that kind of a response. But some of the coursework was getting kind of out on the edge, and so some of that you'd have to tuck it in somehow or other.
You're talking science.
Yeah,
courses.
just in the sciences. That was the only place we had any real experience with it. But there were other pressures besides this path less traveled, the Robert Frost concept, which include students who don't understand, what this concentration is. They were accustomed to referring to departments, Department of Biology, Department of Chemistry, and so on. And we're not talking about departments, we're talking about concentrations. So that kind of forced, along with the community, the public perception about this strange terminology they're using out there on this Green Bay campus, that led to a co-major, which was discipline. And that was the first break in this interdisciplinary unit as the basis of all undergraduate students. And now could do a co-major in biology or a co-major in chemistry. And then it evolved, and I don't have all the steps here, but then it came to a point where you could do a major in a discipline, but you had to have a minor at least in an interdisciplinary unit, so that was, squeezed down to just a minor level.
Okay, there
And
were
some would quickly do a double major too, biology and natural science, and something like that, because it could work out with you don't need to do a whole lot more coursework to go from a minor to a major.
There was a mention in the news release file that I reviewed recently about conferences being held here with people from who were from the Union of Experimental Colleges, people who were experts in innovation in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Did that play a role in any of the faculty discussions?
I don't remember it. No,
Yeah.
I don't remember it.
Even have
There was a group that I think was dominated by the social sciences, who were pretty active in that kind of stuff. But I'm not real sure about it. We were getting pretty strongly involved in research on the Bay, and the whole spectrum of projects, which in my case started out with kind of pure science orientations to the projects. Jack Norman, who's a chemist, radio chemist, and I worked on a really neat little study using radioactive phosphorus as a tracer and so on. But it didn't have an immediate application. It wasn't going to solve any problems. It was just a nice description about a small process that was going on. Well, gradually you begin to do research. The Sea Grant program was fostering more applied kinds of research, and I got to be comfortable with that after
That means
a while.
problem solving, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Because again, the term is used again in the mission and other literature, problem solving education. So
Yeah.
how did you apply that in your area?
Oh, well, you can incorporate that in a stream ecology class or in a limnology class very easy. I could do that very easy. And other people who were working on terrestrial systems, I found that they could make that application as well. So you're talking about real world problems here, and also things that you're doing now. We can identify, as an example, the sources of phosphorus in the basin, which is something that Jim Wiersma and I did, 1972. And that became kind of point sources, non-point sources, Lake Winnebago, things like that would be the sources that we're talking about. And it's important because phosphorus is a major culprit in the quality of the water of Lower Green Bay. So if you're going to do anything about the phosphorus, you got to find out where it's coming from.
Was that known? Was phosphorus, the role of phosphorus, known in 1969?
Well, certainly by 1972 it was. It was known always to be a problem, but there was a conference which established the importance of phosphorus as the limiting nutrient in algal systems.
That conference here, or
no? It was over at Kellogg Station in Michigan. It was sponsored by Michigan State University, I think it was. It means that among the whole pool of nutrients that are being utilized by plants and algae, for example, the one that is most critical, and it is concentrated in the algae and at a higher level than any of the others, over the level that's in the water. Phosphorus, therefore, if you can control phosphorus, reduce phosphorus, then you'll reduce these problems of algal blooms and the soupy green water and so on and so forth. So, given that,